When the body no longer seeks constant stimulation, when it steps away from craving and consumption, something powerful begins to happen within. There is a silence that emerges, not the absence of life, but the presence of something far deeper, a sacred stillness. And in that stillness, the soul begins to speak. For many, abstinence is seen as a denial of pleasure, a restriction, a turning away from what is natural. But what if instead it's a sacred pause, a deliberate, conscious decision to quiet the body so the soul can be heard? The soul speaks a different language than the body. It doesn't shout, doesn't demand, doesn't seduce or beg. It whispers. It nudges. It breathes truth into your awareness when you finally slow down enough to receive it. And abstinence, in whatever form it takes, whether physical, emotional, or energetic, is not about punishment. It's about permission. Permission to come home to yourself, to remember who you are outside of desire, outside of validation, outside of the chase. Sometimes when we've been overgiving, overdoing, overstimulating, our bodies keep going long after our spirits have grown weary. We stay connected to people, to habits, to patterns that no longer serve us simply because they feel familiar. But when the body goes silent, when we consciously choose to step back from the noise of physical desire or external connection, we begin to realize how much of our movement was never truly aligned with our essence. We begin to see where we've been using intimacy as a distraction, affection as a cover, or pleasure as a painkiller. Abstinence becomes a mirror. In the absence of touch, we feel where we are starving for emotional nourishment. In the absence of performance, we learn what it means to simply be. We are forced to sit with our unmet needs, our old stories, our unhealed wounds, and that is where the transformation begins. Not in the doing, but in the undoing. The sacred pause allows space for clarity. In stillness, the truth rises. What you used to tolerate becomes intolerable. What you thought you needed to feel whole starts to fall away. You start hearing your intuition again. You begin to remember your worth, not based on how someone touches you, but on how deeply you know and honor yourself. This is not about shutting down your desires forever. It's about resetting the connection to yourself, to your body, to the divine. We live in a world that glamorizes constant access, constant stimulation. We are told that intimacy equals worth, that attention equals love, that desire equals connection. But the soul doesn't play by those rules. The soul craves alignment, not attention. The soul calls you not toward more, but toward meaning. And abstinence, when chosen consciously, becomes an act of rebellion against the belief that you must always be available to be valuable. It says, I am worthy even in my quiet. I am powerful even in my pause. When the body goes silent, it is not broken. It is awake. It is honoring something sacred. It is turning inward to allow the soul to take the lead. And in that moment, something beautiful happens. You begin to trust yourself again. You start hearing the soft voice within that says, you don't have to prove anything to be loved. You already are. Because the deepest love is not the one that comes from others, it's the one that comes from within. And when you allow yourself to be still, when you dare to pause and feel and listen, you will find that everything you were chasing was already living inside you. This is where real healing begins. When the body chooses silence, when physical desire is no longer leading every interaction, there is space to see what was always hidden underneath. Abstinence, especially when it's intentional, becomes more than just a break from physical intimacy. It becomes a revealing, a mirror, a teacher. In the absence of touch, noise, and distraction, our inner world becomes loud. The soul starts pointing toward the unhealed wounds we tried to bury with pleasure, the emotional patterns we tried to avoid by staying busy or desired. This is the part most people don't expect. They think abstinence will bring peace right away, clarity in a beautiful, effortless way. But more often than not, what comes first is discomfort. The kind of discomfort that feels like loneliness but is really unfamiliar stillness. We start to realize how often we've used our bodies to silence emotions we didn't want to feel. We used sex to feel connected. We used attention to feel alive. We used validation to numb the pain of not being seen. And then the body goes silent. There's no one to distract us, no partner to pour into, no temporary high to chase, just us, raw, unguarded, and honest. That's where the soul steps in. That's where the real work begins. You begin to see clearly the times you gave yourself away too easily, the times you ignored red flags just to keep someone close, the times you confused physical intimacy with emotional safety. All those moments are no longer buried. They rise to the surface not to shame you, but to free you. This is where abstinence becomes a path to healing. It's not about being better than others or more pure or more disciplined. It's about reclaiming the parts of you that you forgot in the noise. The parts that whispered, I want to be seen for my soul, not my body. The part of you that got tired of performing. The part that craved connection deeper than skin. And suddenly you can hear those parts. You can feel them. They aren't as broken as you once thought. They were just waiting for silence to be heard. When we give ourselves the gift of abstinence, we are giving ourselves the opportunity to look at our patterns without judgment. We see how often we gave because we were afraid of being left, how often we stayed because we feared being alone, how often we allowed our boundaries to be crossed because we didn't know if we were worthy of more. These revelations hurt at first, but they are sacred because once you see it, you can't unsee it, and once you see it, you can heal it. You begin to realize that the pain wasn't because love isn't real. It's because we tried to find love in places where it was never meant to grow. And abstinence becomes the soil where something new can take root. Not forced, not desperate, but slow, intentional, and true. The kind of connection that comes from already being whole, not from needing someone else to fill the void. This kind of pause is not passive. It is deeply active. It requires courage to sit with the discomfort. It requires grace to forgive yourself for what you accepted in the past. And it requires patience to listen to the soul even when what it reveals is hard to hear. But this is where transformation lives. In the honest, raw, soul-level truth that only surfaces when the body stops shouting and starts listening. And when those hidden wounds come forward, when they finally have space to breathe, they don't destroy you. They cleanse you. They teach you. They remind you of your strength. They remind you that healing isn't about forgetting what hurt you. It's about facing it so fully that it can no longer define you. And in that process, you begin to feel something you haven't felt in a long time: freedom. Choosing abstinence is often misunderstood. It's not about suppressing desire or disconnecting from intimacy. It's a conscious act of self-respect. When a person chooses to abstain, whether from physical intimacy, emotional entanglement, or energetic overextension, they are setting a sacred boundary. Not a wall to keep people out, but a filter to protect what is tender, healing, and still growing within. This is an act of radical self-love, one that says, I matter enough to protect my peace. I matter enough to choose what nurtures me instead of what drains me. So many of us have been conditioned to believe that our worth is tied to what we give, how available we are, how desirable, how willing we are to sacrifice ourselves for the sake of connection. We stretch ourselves thin trying to be enough. We say yes when we want to say no. We let people into our lives and our beds hoping it will make the emptiness inside us quieter, but it never does, not for long. Because true fulfillment doesn't come from being wanted, it comes from being respected, especially by yourself. And abstinence, when rooted in self-respect, is not about withholding out of fear or pride. It's about knowing your value so deeply that you are no longer willing to trade your soul's peace for temporary satisfaction. It's about realizing that being chosen by someone else should never come at the cost of abandoning yourself. It's about standing in your own truth, even when it's lonely, even when it's hard, and saying, I will not shrink to fit into something that doesn't hold me with reverence. In a world that constantly encourages us to give more, do more, and be more for others, choosing abstinence becomes a rebellion, a quiet, fierce rebellion that refuses to equate availability with love. It's a reclamation of your body, your energy, your boundaries, and it's a reminder that you don't owe anyone access to your life just because they ask. You get to choose. You get to say, not right now, I'm honoring myself. When you begin to walk this path, you start to notice things. You notice how certain people only showed up when you were available to meet their needs. You notice how often you stayed in relationships that drained you simply because you didn't want to be alone. You notice how your boundaries were never the problem. It was the people who didn't respect them that were. And in this noticing, you begin to heal. Because abstinence isn't just about what you stop doing, it's about what you start remembering. You remember how sacred your energy is, you remember how powerful your intuition is, you remember how whole you already are. And that kind of remembering brings peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from everything being perfect, but the kind that comes from knowing you no longer have to betray yourself to be loved. This journey isn't always easy. There will be moments where you doubt your decision, moments where the silence feels louder than comfort, moments where you're tempted to go back to what's familiar, even if it's unfulfilling. But if you stay with yourself, if you hold that line of self-respect, you will begin to attract relationships that mirror that respect back to you. You'll no longer tolerate crumbs when you know you are the feast. You'll no longer settle for being needed when you deserve to be cherished. And over time, that self-respect becomes your compass. You begin to make choices that reflect your worth. You begin to speak from a place of truth rather than fear. You begin to live in alignment with your soul instead of the stories you once believed about what you had to do to be loved. That's the quiet power of abstinence, not in what you avoid, but in what you reclaim. In the stillness, in the quiet that abstinence creates, something powerful happens. The soul begins to speak, not with loud declarations or flashy signs, but with gentle nudges, with deep knowing, with an inner voice that's been waiting patiently to be heard. You see, the soul doesn't compete with noise. It doesn't scream over chaos. It waits. And when the body finally rests from its constant craving and the mind lets go of its endless searching, the soul steps forward with clarity. We live in a world that worships movement, doing, achieving, seducing, proving. But the soul is not interested in performance. It's not interested in how many people desire you, how successful you appear, or how much validation you collect. The soul wants truth. It wants authenticity. And the truth is, many of us have spent so long chasing what we thought would fulfill us, only to find ourselves more lost, more exhausted, and more disconnected than ever. When you choose abstinence, when you choose to disconnect from what's external in order to listen to what's internal, you are choosing to tune into a different frequency. A frequency that doesn't beg for attention but invites you into alignment. And that alignment doesn't come from adding more to your life. It comes from subtracting the noise, the distractions, the false identities, the relationships that felt good but weren't right, the habits that numbed you instead of healed you. As you sit in this sacred stillness, you start to realize something profound. Most of the answers you were chasing out there were always in here, inside, beneath the ache, beneath the stories, beneath the pressure to be something you're not. The soul begins to reveal where you've been pretending. It shows you the moments you silenced your own needs to avoid conflict. It reflects the relationships you held on to out of fear instead of love. And it whispers the truth you may have been too afraid to admit, that real peace, real joy, and real love cannot be found when you're disconnected from yourself. This truth isn't always easy to sit with, because when the soul speaks, it doesn't just affirm you, it challenges you. It asks you to stop playing small. It asks you to release the identities that no longer fit. It asks you to step into a version of yourself that is terrifyingly free. But in that freedom, there's power. The power to say no, the power to walk away, the power to rewrite your story, not from wounds, but from wisdom. As you continue on this path, you begin to notice your intuition sharpening. You start sensing when something feels off, even if it looks perfect on the surface. You start trusting your body not as a tool for validation, but as a sacred vessel of truth. And most importantly, you begin to trust yourself. Not the self that performs or pleases, but the self that simply is, the self that knows you are already enough. This inner clarity creates outer change. You no longer engage in conversations that drain you. You no longer chase love. You embody it. You no longer feel guilty for choosing yourself because you understand now that choosing yourself is the most loving thing you can do for everyone around you. In a world that tries to convince us that we have to hustle for worthiness, that we have to earn love through effort or sacrifice, choosing stillness is revolutionary. Choosing to let the body go silent so the soul can speak is a radical act of healing. It is the moment you stop running. It is the moment you turn inward and say, I'm ready to hear the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is, because I know on the other side of that truth is freedom. And once your soul starts speaking, you'll never want to go back to the noise. Desire is not the enemy. It is a beautiful, natural part of being human. But when desire controls you, when it becomes something you chase compulsively without consciousness, it can leave you feeling more empty than fulfilled. Abstinence is not about denying desire altogether. It's about transforming it. It's about taking that raw, powerful energy and redirecting it towards something higher, something sacred. When the body is no longer driven by urges and impulses, it opens a door to a deeper kind of strength. You begin to realize that the energy you used to spend trying to feel wanted or satisfied can be harnessed to awaken something far greater within you. In ancient traditions, this practice of redirecting desire is known as transmutation. It's the idea that sexual or emotional energy, when not discharged or scattered, can become a force of spiritual expansion. And this isn't about shame. It's not about viewing desire as dirty or wrong. It's about recognizing its potential as fuel. Just like fire can destroy or warm a home, desire can consume you or empower you. It all depends on how you choose to channel it. When you abstain, especially intentionally and with purpose, you begin to feel your energy shift. You're no longer leaking it into places or people who don't value you. You're no longer compromising your values for connection or touch. Instead, you're gathering your energy back, reclaiming your power, and that power begins to transform into creativity, into focus, into clarity of vision. You begin to think more clearly. You start noticing what truly matters to you. The distractions fall away, and your path, your purpose comes into sharper focus. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It comes through discipline, through moments of discomfort where your old patterns call you back, where the craving for instant gratification flares up. But with each moment you choose presence over impulse, you strengthen your spirit. You become more grounded, more rooted in your truth. And from this space you begin to create, not out of lack, not out of hunger, but from overflow. Your relationships change too. You stop confusing chemistry for compatibility. You stop mistaking desire for devotion. You stop allowing temporary attention to masquerade as real intimacy, because now you're connected to something deeper yourself. And once you're anchored in that connection, you'll never again sacrifice it for someone who doesn't meet you there. This is what people mean when they talk about spiritual energy. It's not just about prayer or meditation or rituals. It's about the day-to-day choices that align you with your higher self. It's about being intentional with your energy, knowing that every yes you give someone is also a yes to the kind of life you're building. So you stop giving those yeses away so easily. You become more discerning, not from fear, but from wisdom. And then something beautiful happens. You begin to glow differently. People feel it. They sense your clarity, your peace, your power. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because you've stopped outsourcing your worth. You've turned inward, and in doing so, you've tapped into a deeper source of strength. A strength that doesn't scream but radiates. A strength that doesn't beg to be seen but cannot be ignored. Abstinence, when chosen with love, becomes a sacred act of transformation. It's not about punishment. It's about alignment. It's about reclaiming your time, your energy, your body, and redirecting all of that towards your soul's highest expression. And that is not only powerful, it's liberating. True abstinence is often misunderstood. People hear the word and immediately associate it with restriction, denial, or some kind of moral rigidity. But that couldn't be further from the deeper truth. When you choose abstinence with intention, not from fear but from freedom, you begin to experience a profound shift in your relationship with yourself and the world. This isn't about avoiding pleasure, it's about elevating it. It's about no longer being a slave to impulses and instead becoming the master of your own energy, your own time, your own body, your own spirit. There's something incredibly powerful about saying, I don't need this to validate me. Whether it's sex, attention, distraction, or any other external fix, abstinence allows you to cut ties with the belief that you must be constantly filled from the outside. It creates space to reconnect with your truth, space to rebuild the foundation of your worth, space to hear the voice of your own soul without interference. This space doesn't feel empty. In fact, it becomes full of clarity. When you're no longer operating from habit or unconscious need, you start seeing things as they really are. You notice how often you were choosing things, people, or situations that weren't in alignment with your spirit. You see how often you silenced your intuition just to maintain connection, even when that connection cost you your peace. Abstinence strips away the noise, the chaos, the drama, and in its place, it reveals what's real. Freedom through abstinence isn't about what you're running from, it's about what you're returning to. It's a coming home to yourself, a return to wholeness. It's the moment you stop negotiating with your own value and instead begin honoring it like the sacred thing it is. And when you truly embody that level of self-respect, it changes everything. Your energy speaks before you do. Your presence communicates boundaries without needing to explain them. People feel your shift, even if they can't name it. This kind of freedom is rare in a world addicted to stimulation. Most people don't even realize they're operating from compulsion because constant access to pleasure has made it easy to avoid discomfort. But discomfort is often where the truth lives. When you stop distracting yourself and sit with what's real, what hurts, what needs healing, what's been ignored, you reclaim the parts of yourself that have been scattered across time and experience. That's where power comes from, not from control, but from integration, from becoming whole. Abstinence becomes a tool in this journey, not a punishment, but a pathway. A way to detox your spirit from all the things that were never really feeding you. A way to clear out the clutter so your purpose, your values, your deepest desires can rise to the surface. And when you live from that place, your choices become clearer. You stop settling. You stop explaining. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's story. You are no longer driven by lack. You are led by truth. You are no longer chasing connection. You are cultivating it within yourself. And that kind of wholeness, that kind of self-possession, it cannot be taken from you no matter who comes or goes. So don't let the world convince you that abstinence is lack. Don't let it sell you the lie that freedom is found in saying yes to everything. Sometimes the most radical act of freedom is saying no. No to what drains you. No to what distracts you. No to what doesn't honor your evolution. Because when you choose yourself fully, body, mind, and soul, you begin to realize that what you thought was restriction was actually the road to liberation.